I never thought my honeymoon would be the moment my entire life split into before and after. Before, I was a man who believed in love, trust, and the idea that choosing the right person meant building something unbreakable. After, I became someone else entirely, someone colder, someone sharper, someone who understood that the person sleeping beside you could be the one planning how you die. We were in the Maldives, in a private overwater villa that felt more like a dream than a real place. The kind of place you only ever see in curated photos online, where the water looks impossibly clear and the sky seems designed rather than natural. Beneath the wooden floorboards, the ocean shimmered in shifting shades of turquoise and blue, so transparent it felt like the villa was floating on glass. The air was warm, soft, almost unreal, carrying the quiet rhythm of waves brushing against the stilts below us. And standing at the edge of the deck was Serena, my wife of 4 days, dressed in a white silk slip that caught the wind just enough to move with her body. Her hair, long and dark, drifted behind her like something out of a film, and for a moment I stood there just watching her, thinking how absurdly lucky I was. I remember thinking I had somehow won at life, that everything I had worked for had led to this exact moment. I walked up behind her slowly, barefoot against the warm wood, wrapped my arms around her waist, and pressed my lips to her neck the way she always loved. That was the moment everything changed, though I didn't understand it yet, because instead of leaning into me, instead of softening the way she always did, she froze. Not playfully, not shyly, completely still, like my touch didn't belong there anymore. It was subtle, almost nothing, the kind of reaction most people would miss or brush off. And that's exactly what I did. I laughed softly, keeping things light, asking if she already had honeymoon blues. She turned toward me with that same perfect smile I had fallen for, the one that had convinced me she was everything I had been searching for, and told me she was just tired. The words were right, the tone was right, everything about it was technically correct, but her eyes didn't match. There was a distance there, something colder, something I had never seen before, and it created a small, almost invisible crack in the version of reality I was holding on to. I ignored it, of course. People always do. When something threatens the story you've built in your head, you don't question it, you protect it. You convince yourself it's nothing, that you're overthinking, that everything is exactly as it should be. That night unfolded exactly how a honeymoon is supposed to. We had dinner under the open sky, a private table set right at the edge of the water, candles flickering in the breeze while the ocean stretched endlessly into darkness. The staff moved quietly around us, almost invisible, bringing plates that looked more like art than food and wine, that tasted far more expensive than anything I had ever ordered for myself before. Serena laughed, touched my hand, leaned into me like she belonged there, like we belonged together. If someone had taken a picture of us in that moment, it would have looked perfect. And maybe that's what makes moments like that so dangerous, because perfection can hide anything. Later, back in the villa, we left the doors open so the sound of the waves filled the room, and we moved together like nothing in the world existed outside of that space. It should have felt like the beginning of something permanent, something real, but even then there was something just slightly off. Not enough to stop. Not enough to question. Just enough to feel, like a note in a song that's almost in tune but not quite. She fell asleep quickly afterward, her body relaxed against mine, her breathing slow and steady like she had no worries in the world. I lay there awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand why my mind wouldn't settle. At the time, I told myself it was jet lag, excitement, too much happening at once. Now I know better. Something in me had already started noticing what I wasn't ready to accept. Eventually, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and stepped out onto the deck. The night air wrapped around me, warm and still, and the ocean stretched endlessly into darkness, reflecting the moonlight like shattered silver. It was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, like the world had paused. I leaned against the railing, trying to calm the restless feeling in my chest, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. And then I heard it. At first it was just a faint sound, something soft and indistinct coming from inside the room. I thought maybe she was talking in her sleep or shifting in bed, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. A whisper. Focused. Intentional. I moved slowly toward the sliding glass door, stopping just beside it, not wanting to alert her. Her voice carried through the small gap, low and controlled in a way I had never heard before. She said I was asleep, that I suspected nothing, and in that moment something inside me tightened so sharply it felt like it snapped. Then she mentioned the life insurance policy. $10 million. Double payout if it was accidental. For a second my brain refused to process it, searching desperately for another explanation, another context where those words made sense. But then she laughed. And that laugh removed any doubt. It wasn't the laugh I knew. It wasn't warm or soft or affectionate. It was cold, calculated, empty. And then she said his name, Damien. And everything fell into place in the worst possible way. I stood there, completely still, listening as she outlined the plan in calm, almost casual detail. The scuba diving trip the next day. The depth of the reef. The strength of the current. One small push. That was all it would take. She spoke about it like it was simple, like it was inevitable, like my life was just a step in a process she had already decided on. She said no one would question it, that it would look like a tragic accident, that she would play the grieving wife perfectly. She even talked about what would happen after, waiting a few months, collecting the money, disappearing together to finally have the life they wanted. And then, softer, almost affectionate, she told him she couldn't wait to be with him again, that she had missed him, that she had never stopped loving him. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. Not shattered, shifted, because breaking would have meant panic, emotion, reaction, and reaction would have gotten me killed. Instead, something colder took over, something precise, something that understood, instantly, that survival now depended on control. I stepped back from the door as quietly as I could, returned to the bed, and lay down beside her like nothing had happened. My body felt heavy, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I slowed my breathing, closed my eyes, and waited. When she came back to bed a few minutes later, she curled into me like she always did, resting her head against my chest, her hand draped lightly over me. The familiarity of it should have meant something. It didn't. All I could think about was how easily that same hand could push me underwater. I lay there for hours, staring into the darkness behind my closed eyes, replaying every word, every detail, every possibility. By the time morning came, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to run. I was going to play along. Because if she believed I was exactly who she thought I was, naive, trusting, completely in love, then I would have time to gather evidence, time to understand the full picture, time to turn everything around. And when the time came, I wouldn't just survive. I would make sure they lost everything. Morning came too quickly, and with it, the version of reality I now had to perform inside. I felt her move beside me before I opened my eyes, her body stretching slowly, her hand sliding across my chest like everything between us was still real. For a brief second, I stayed completely still, letting the moment sit there, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Every normal moment from this point forward was going to be a lie, not just from her, but from me too. I opened my eyes gradually, letting my expression soften into the same warmth she expected, the same unguarded affection I had shown her every day since we met. She smiled the moment our eyes met, leaning down to kiss me lightly, her lips warm, familiar, and completely disconnected from the truth I now carried. "Good morning, husband," she whispered, her voice gentle, almost playful. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I would have believed her completely. I would have smiled without hesitation, pulled her closer, told her how lucky I felt. Instead, I mirrored everything perfectly, because now every reaction had to be controlled. "Good morning," I said, letting a quiet smile form, keeping my tone soft, natural, unaware. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, pretending nothing had changed when everything had. We had breakfast on the deck, sunlight reflecting off the water so brightly it almost hurt to look at. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before, but for me every detail felt sharper, more defined, like my senses had adjusted to something darker beneath the surface. Serena was radiant. That was the only word for it. She laughed easily, reached across the table to touch my hand, fed me small pieces of fruit like it was some effortless romantic ritual. She talked about the dive later that day, her excitement sounding completely genuine, describing the reef, the fish, the experience of exploring something untouched together. The way she spoke, anyone listening would have believed she was talking about creating memories, not ending a life. I watched her carefully while pretending not to. Every expression, every pause, every shift in her tone, I was analyzing everything. There were moments, small ones, almost invisible, where something didn't line up, a fraction of hesitation before she smiled, a slight tightening around her eyes when I mentioned staying close to the group during the dive, a subtle redirection whenever the conversation drifted toward anything unpredictable. It wasn't enough for someone else to notice. But for me, now that I knew, it was everything. The dive center was exactly what you'd expect. Clean, professional, calm. Staff moving efficiently, other couples laughing, taking photos, adjusting gear. It was almost surreal standing there among people who had no idea that for me, this wasn't just another honeymoon activity. This was a controlled risk, a planned attempt, a situation where one wrong move could end everything. Serena stayed close to me, her hand brushing mine occasionally, her body angled toward me like she needed that physical connection. Anyone watching would have seen affection. I saw positioning. I saw awareness. I saw calculation. I made my first move there, not obvious, not confrontational, just enough to shift control slightly. I asked more questions than necessary about safety procedures, about visibility, about staying within range of the instructor. I laughed it off, making it sound like I was just being overly cautious, even slightly nervous. The instructor reassured me, explaining everything in detail, and I nodded along, making sure to establish one thing clearly. I was not going to be alone. Serena didn't argue. She smiled, even teased me lightly about being dramatic. But again, there it was. That flicker, that brief moment where her expression tightened before smoothing out. She had a plan. and I was already disrupting it. Underwater, everything slowed down. The world above disappeared, replaced by a quiet, almost surreal stillness. The reef stretched beneath us, alive with color and movement, fish weaving through coral in patterns that felt almost unreal. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like walking through a space where something unseen could happen at any moment. Serena held my hand the entire time, her grip firm, steady, almost reassuring. But I wasn't reassured. I was watching her. Watching where she looked, how often her attention drifted away from me toward the deeper parts of the reef. She was searching. There was no other explanation. Her gaze moved differently when she thought I wasn't paying attention, scanning the distance, the shadows, the edges of visibility, looking for him. Damien. I didn't see him, but I didn't need to. The possibility of him being there was enough to keep every nerve in my body alert. I adjusted my positioning constantly, keeping the instructor within view, keeping us in areas with more people, more movement, more witnesses. Every second underwater felt like a calculation. Distance, depth, visibility, control. Nothing happened. Not that day. And that somehow made it worse. Because it meant they were patient. It meant they were willing to wait. When we surfaced, Serena wrapped her arms around me immediately, laughing, her face glowing with excitement as she called it the best experience of her life. She kissed me in front of everyone, holding on to me just long enough for it to look natural, affectionate, convincing. I kissed her back without hesitation. But as I pulled away, I saw it again, that brief, almost imperceptible flicker of disappointment. Just for a second. Then it was gone. That night, the air between us felt heavier, even though nothing had been said. We had dinner like usual, talked about the dive, about how beautiful everything was, about how we should do it again before we left. She brought it up casually, like it was just another idea, but I knew better now. Every suggestion had intent behind it. Every plan had purpose. Back in the villa, she went into the shower, the sound of running water filling the space, steam slowly building against the glass. Her phone was on the bedside table, exactly where she had left it. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling that same tension build again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was decision. I picked it up, my movements slow, controlled, deliberate. I already knew what I was going to find. What I didn't expect was how much of it there would be. Messages filled the screen, not just recent ones, but months of conversations. Continuous, unbroken. They had never stopped talking, not for a single day. Everything she had told me about him being out of her life, it had all been a lie. Their messages weren't just casual check-ins. They were detailed, deliberate, and disturbing in their clarity. Plans, timing, financial discussions, even emotional exchanges that made it painfully clear this wasn't just manipulation, it was connection. Real, twisted, deeply rooted connection. They talked about me like I wasn't even a person, like I was a step in a process, a requirement, something temporary. And then I saw it, the countdown, a simple message, buried in the thread but impossible to ignore. Day 4, honeymoon. He dies. There was no hesitation in the words, no doubt, no emotion, just certainty. Something inside me went completely still. Not rage, not shock. Clarity, pure, focused clarity. I started taking screenshots methodically, making sure I captured everything that mattered. Conversations, timestamps, financial references, anything that could prove intent. I backed it all up immediately to a secure account she would never have access to, double-checking every step to make sure there was no trace left behind. When I was done, I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, down to the angle. The details mattered now. Every detail. When she stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, her expression relaxed, I was sitting on the edge of the bed waiting. She smiled when she saw me. That same effortless smile, the one that had convinced me of everything once. I stood up, walked toward her, and pulled her into my arms without hesitation. She melted into it, just like she always did. "I love you," I whispered into her hair. The words came out smoothly, naturally, like nothing had changed. She smiled against my chest, her voice soft as she said it back. "I love you too." And in that moment I realized something important. The person she thought she was manipulating didn't exist anymore. Because now, this wasn't a relationship. This wasn't even betrayal anymore. This was something else, entirely. This was a game, and I had just learned all the rules. From that moment on, everything became deliberate. Every word I spoke, every look I gave her, every touch, I calculated all of it. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The version of me that reacted emotionally, that trusted instinctively, that loved without question, that version was gone. In its place was someone who understood that survival depended on control, and control depended on patience. Serena, on the other hand, was becoming more comfortable. I could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed, in the way her smiles came more easily, in the way she stopped watching me as closely as she had right after that first dive. To her, the plan was still intact, delayed, maybe, but not threatened. And that confidence, that belief that she was still in control, was exactly what I needed. Because the more confident she became, the more careless she would be, and careless people make mistakes. I started testing her in subtle ways. Nothing obvious, nothing that would raise suspicion, just small shifts in behavior designed to see how she reacted. One afternoon, while we were lying on the deck with the sun warming our skin and the ocean stretching endlessly in front of us, I casually mentioned the idea of extending our stay. I said it lightly, like it was just a romantic thought, like I didn't want the trip to end. For a fraction of a second, her expression tightened. It was almost invisible, something most people would never notice, but I saw it clearly. Then she smiled and agreed, saying she'd love more time with me. That was all I needed. Timing mattered. The plan had a structure, a schedule, and I had just disrupted it slightly. Another day, I suggested we join a group excursion with other couples from the resort. Again, that same flicker, that same microsecond of hesitation before she adjusted. She didn't want variables. She didn't want unpredictability. She wanted control over the environment, over the moment, over me. Every reaction confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned, carefully, thoroughly, and over a long period of time. At night while she slept, I worked. Not frantically, not recklessly, but methodically. I contacted my lawyer through secure channels, giving him just enough information to begin preparing, without exposing everything too soon. I arranged for a full review of my assets, quietly shifting ownership structures, reinforcing protections, making sure that if something happened to me, nothing would go where she expected it to. At the same time, I stayed in contact with the investigator, who had started digging deeper into Damien. The reports that came back only strengthened my resolve. Debt like I suspected, but worse than I imagined. Not just financial pressure, but the kind that comes with consequences. The kind that pushes people into decisions they can't walk back from. There were also patterns, short relationships, manipulation, sudden disappearances. He wasn't just part of the plan. He was the engine behind it. And Serena, she wasn't just a victim of him. She was complicit, fully aware, fully involved. During the day, I became everything she expected me to be, and more. I leaned into the role so completely that even I almost believed it at times. I was attentive, affectionate, spontaneous. I surprised her with small gifts from the resort boutique, planned dinners on the beach, held her hand like I couldn't imagine letting go. The more I gave her, the less she questioned anything, and the less she questioned, the more space I had to move. That was the key. Not confrontation, not resistance, expansion. I needed room to build something she couldn't see until it was too late. But the hardest part wasn't the strategy. It was the emotional residue. Because no matter how clear everything had become, no matter how much evidence I had seen, there were still moments, small, quiet, dangerous moments, where the past tried to push through. One evening, we were sitting at the edge of the deck again, our feet in the water, the sky painted in soft shades of purple and blue as the sun disappeared. She rested her head on my shoulder and exhaled slowly, like she was completely at peace. "I feel like this is the beginning of our real life," she said softly. The words were simple, almost innocent. And for a split second, something inside me responded. Not belief, not trust, but memory. The memory of what I thought we had. The memory of the version of her I had loved. It lasted less than a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the image of her messages, her voice, her plan. I wrapped my arm around her anyway, because that's what she expected. "It is," I said quietly. And in that moment, I understood something that changed everything. She wasn't just lying to me. She was living inside her own version of reality too. One where everything she was doing made sense. One where I wasn't a person, but a step towards something better. That realization made the next step easier. Because now, I didn't just want to stop her. I wanted to end it completely. Not emotionally. Not privately. Completely. I began setting the final pieces into place. I coordinated with my lawyer to prepare documents that would trigger the moment we returned, filings that would freeze certain assets, initiate proceedings, and ensure she had no access to anything she thought she was entitled to. I worked with the investigator to compile everything into a format that wasn't just evidence, but a case. Something that couldn't be dismissed, ignored, or explained away. At the same time, I made sure to maintain absolute normalcy on the surface. No tension, no distance. If anything, I became more engaged, more present, more invested. By the time we reached the final days of the trip, she had completely stopped watching me for signs of suspicion. In her mind, I was exactly who she thought I was. And that was the most dangerous position she could be in. On the last evening, she made her move again. We were having dinner on the beach, candles flickering between us, the sound of the waves steady and calm in the background. She reached across the table, took my hand, and looked at me in a way that would have once meant everything. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "maybe we should go for one more dive tomorrow, before we leave. Just the two of us. No guide. Something more private. More meaningful." The way she said it was perfect. Careful. Emotional. Framed as something intimate. Something special. But underneath it, I heard the same thing I had heard that first night. Opportunity. Control. Execution. I smiled without hesitation, squeezing her hand gently. "That sounds perfect," I said. And in that moment, the roles were completely reversed. She thought she was setting the final step of her plan. She thought she was guiding me exactly where she needed me to be. But what she didn't realize was that I had already decided exactly how this was going to end. And this time, I was the one in control. The final night didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something stretched thin between two outcomes, both of us standing on opposite sides of a truth only one of us fully understood. Serena was calm, too calm. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a lightness that hadn't been there before, as if the delay in her plan had only made her more certain, more precise. To her, everything was still on track. She believed she had already won, and that belief showed in the way she looked at me, not with suspicion, but with quiet assurance. We walked back to the villa in silence, her hand slipping into mine naturally, her fingers interlocking with mine in a way that once meant comfort but now felt like control disguised as affection. I didn't pull away. I matched her pace, her rhythm, her silence, because this moment wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about timing. Inside the villa, everything felt disturbingly normal. She set her phone down, poured herself a drink, and asked if I wanted one. Her voice soft and relaxed, like we were just another couple ending a perfect day. I took the glass, thanked her, and watched her closely. Her posture was loose, her guard completely down, and that was when I knew it was time. Not later. Not after another conversation. Now. I walked to the door slowly and locked it. The click was quiet, but it changed everything. She looked at me, her expression still neutral, still open. "Serena," I said, my voice calm, steady, stripped of everything it used to carry. She smiled automatically. "Yes?" There was no fear in her yet. "I know everything." The shift didn't come all at once, it moved through her in layers. First confusion, then recognition, then something colder. Her smile froze, like her face didn't know how to function without it. "I don't know what she started, but stopped when I pulled out my phone and pressed play." Her voice filled the room, unmistakable, undeniable, every word from that night cutting through the silence, the dive, the push, the money, Damien, the future they had planned without me. She didn't move while it played. She just stood there, staring at me, her breathing shallow, her body caught between denial and realization. When it ended, the version of her I had married was gone. "What is this?" she said, her voice unsteady. I stepped closer. "This is the truth." She shook her head, stepping back. "Nathaniel, you're misunderstanding." I cut her off. "No. You married me for money. You planned to kill me. You've been talking to Damien this entire time. You had a countdown for the day I was supposed to die. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word landed exactly where it needed to." That was when the tears came. Fast, controlled, almost immediate. "I can explain," she said, her voice breaking just enough to sound real. "I was scared. Damien is dangerous. He told me if I didn't do this, he would hurt me. I didn't have a choice. It was convincing, but it didn't matter anymore." "You had a choice," I said quietly. "Every single day. Every time you smiled at me. Every time you told me you loved me while planning how I would die." I stepped closer again, forcing her to meet my eyes. "You didn't choose fear. You chose this." Something in her expression shifted. The tears stayed, but behind them was calculation. She was looking for another angle. "There's more you don't know," she said quickly. "Damien is already here. If you go to the police—" I smiled, not out of humor, but certainty. "I know he's here." That was the moment everything collapsed for her, because that was when she realized she wasn't ahead anymore. She wasn't even equal. She was behind. "I've seen everything," I continued. "The messages, the plans, the money, the countdown. I've backed it all up, multiple places. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and final." "This doesn't end with another plan," I said quietly. "It ends here." She didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't try again, because there was nothing left to say. The silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of the ocean outside, steady and indifferent. I stepped back, creating distance, not because I needed it, but because I no longer needed to be close to her at all. "You wanted me gone," I said finally. "Now you're the one who leaves." She stood there for a moment longer, then slowly sat down, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. The tears continued, but they meant nothing now. Nothing she could say, nothing she could do, could change what had already been set in motion. Because this wasn't just confrontation. This was the end of everything she thought she controlled, and the beginning of everything she was about to lose. The moment we landed back home, everything moved exactly the way I had planned it, precise and irreversible, like a sequence already set in motion long before she realized the ground beneath her had disappeared. Serena didn't say much on the flight. She stayed quiet, distant, trying to rebuild some version of control in her mind, but I could see it in the way she avoided looking at me. She knew there was nothing left to fix. By the time we stepped off the plane, the illusion was already gone. I didn't confront her again, didn't argue, didn't even raise my voice. I didn't need to, because everything that mattered was already in place. My lawyer had filed the necessary documents before we even left the Maldives, initiating proceedings that ensured she had no access to anything she thought she was walking into. Accounts were secured, assets protected, permissions revoked. The life she had planned to take from me was already out of her reach. 2 days later, Damien was arrested. It happened fast, exactly how it needed to. The evidence I had gathered, the recordings, the messages, the financial trails, was more than enough to build a case that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Conspiracy to commit murder isn't something that leaves room for negotiation, and he didn't see it coming. Serena was next. Watching it unfold from a distance, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not relief, but clarity. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. There was no chaos, no revenge-driven mistakes, no emotional collapse, just consequence. The story spread quickly. Headlines picked it up within days, turning what had happened into something the world could see, analyze, judge. Newlywed husband discovers wife's murder plot on honeymoon. People read it, shared it, reacted to it. But for me, it was never about attention. It was about exposure, about making sure the truth existed outside of that villa, outside of that moment, somewhere it couldn't be rewritten or denied. The court process was direct and unforgiving. Evidence doesn't care about excuses, and there were too many pieces, too many connections, too much intent documented in their own words. Serena tried at first to shift the narrative back toward fear, toward manipulation, toward being forced into something she couldn't control. But the messages told a different story, a consistent story, one that didn't change no matter how many times it was examined. Damien's history worked against him as well, reinforcing the pattern, strengthening the case. In the end, there was no dramatic twist, no last-minute reversal, just outcomes. Serena was sentenced to 12 years. Damien received 15. The plan they had built so carefully, the future they had imagined together, it ended in a courtroom, stripped of everything they thought they controlled. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel the need to. Because this was never about winning in the way they understood it. It was about ending something that should never have existed in the first place. The divorce finalized quickly after that, clean and decisive. There were no drawn-out arguments, no emotional negotiations, no attempts at reconciliation. There was nothing left to salvage. I kept what was mine, not out of spite, but because it had always been mine. The house, the accounts, the life I had built long before she entered it, all of it remained exactly where it belonged. 6 months later, I found myself standing on a beach again, the ocean stretching endlessly in front of me, the sound of the waves steady and familiar. It wasn't the same place, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was the stillness, the absence of noise, of tension, of something hidden beneath the surface. I held a glass in my hand, watching the light reflect off the water, and for the first time since that night, there was nothing pulling at my thoughts. No replaying conversations, no analyzing expressions, just quiet. I raised the glass slightly, not out of bitterness, not even out of reflection, but as a simple acknowledgement of everything that had changed. To the truth, I said under my breath, the words steady, unforced. Because in the end, that's what this had all been about. Not love, not betrayal, truth. The kind that doesn't reveal itself until it has no other choice. The kind that once seen, changes you completely. I took a sip, exhaled slowly, and allowed something I hadn't felt in a long time to settle in. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from understanding. From knowing exactly what happened, exactly who people were, and exactly why none of it would ever touch me again. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because whatever that version of my life had been, it was over long before the story ever ended. And what remained wasn't damage. It was clarity. And for the first time, that was more than enough.